Welcome to the Intuitive Inc. radio show live with your host, Servet Hassan, with another inspiring author who can help you discover your true potential. Live on Clear Source Radio.
Hello, everybody. It is Sunday night. The name of the show is Intuitive Inc., and I am Servet Hassan, and I've got a great show because we are looking for God. Actually, we found him. How I Found God in Everyone and Everywhere is the name of the book that the two authors, two of them, have written. It's awesome. I've read it. Andrew Davis and Philip Clayton have written it together. We were supposed to have both of them on the line, and something happened. So I couldn't get the two connected at the same time, and we were going live because that's what happens when you go live. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start with Andrew Davis, who is the co-author, and then Philip Clayton is going to call in the second half. So he's listening in as we talk right now, and then he's going to pick up during the second half of the show. And he had the greatest thing to say about Andrew. He said, Andrew really knows what the book's all about. And then he's going to come in with a different angle to it. So I kind of like that idea. So maybe it was meant to be. So who we have on the show right now is Andrew M. Davis, who is a philosopher, a theologian, and a scholar of world religions. He holds degrees in philosophy, theology, and interreligious studies, just like me. No, I'm kidding. I mean, that's awesome. One degree, and I would have been fine with that. But anyway, he won the Claremont School of Theology's Award for Excellence in Biblical Studies in 2013. And he was awarded a fellowship in Auschwitz for the study of professional ethics in 2017. I mean, hello, Andrew. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me on the show, Servet.
You're very welcome. This is a fascinating book. It's How I Found God in Everyone and Everywhere. It's an anthology of spiritual memoirs. And what you two did is you got together and you got a collection of personal, never before published accounts from 11, they're living, but there are 11 leading spiritual writers and teachers. And it's really interesting to me that you got them, and I want to know how you picked them, but there are people like Deepak Chopra and Matthew Fox, and there's Rupert Sheldrake. There's a ton of really awesome people here. And they got together, and you've combined a collection of something that's called panentheism, right?
That's right.
Okay,
that's right. So we...
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, well, you're going to have to explain what that is. So go right ahead and do that because people aren't going to know.
Certainly.
Yeah.
No problem. Well, first to your first point about the authors,
mm-hmm.
You know, when we first began thinking about the book, we wanted to assemble a dynamic and diverse group. And really what we put together is a unique sort of batch of spiritual teachers. They're philosopher poets as well, and also we might say mystic scientists. So each of these authors, you know, Deepak, Matthew Fox, Rupert Sheldrake, Cynthia Bourgeault, to name a few, each of them have made, you know, unique contributions in their own fields, spanning spirituality, philosophy, theology, and even science as well. And each has written exclusively on these various topics. And so we wanted to get a diverse group and then ask them to tell their personal spiritual narratives. That is, the meandering of their own paths into discovering a certain understanding of God that for many will be new, but also has deep and ancient origins. And so that was, to your second point, what has come to be known as panentheism. This is a fancy word, mm-hmm. is a word from the Greek meaning all in God, or everything is within God. And
right.
So this view in different ways is expressed in this book, and panentheism might be thought as a type of spiritual or theological framework. And so there's a couple themes we could bring to light to think about what this framework for thinking about God and the world is like. And mm-hmm. one, it would be divine inclusion, this notion that far from being external or outside of the world, that the universe actually lives through its participation within God. So God includes the universe within the divine being, although God also transcends and is more than the universe. And so from that sort of basic etymological meaning of the term, a few different things follow. For example, intimacy and dynamism. So it's not only the case that God is, enclosed in housing the universe, but that the universe in some sense is animated from within God. Another way of speaking about that might be mutual participation. The fact that the universe not only receives its being from God, but that it also affects and adds to the divine life, so that the imagination is a type of dance that goes on here. And just as a last point to think about that, it for many of the authors, this type of framework changes the question of God, so that the question of God is no longer about whether there is or is not a being out there somewhere with the proper name God. Mm-hmm. The question for panentheism as a spiritual framework is much more a question about what the deepest nature and character is of the reality we inhabit and participate in now. You don't much argue as to whether that exists or not, but you do wonder how best to name it. So exactly. Panentheism is inclusive and immanent framework for thinking about divinity.
Well, right. Now, it's also something that's not new. I mean, you guys didn't come up with this big fancy word. This has been around for a long time. I think one of the authors that you picked, I think it was Matthew Fox, and correct me if I'm wrong because there's quite a few in here, that actually named how panentheism came around over the years, like almost a history of it, and how it's in different religions. Was that the right author? Probably not. But anyway.
No, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. So
okay,
certainly the term itself is rather new, the last 150 or 200 years. But mm-hmm. certainly the vision it communicates can be found across religious traditions and philosophical traditions, and mm-hmm. And in some senses as old as thoughts about God are themselves.
Right, because I think, and I'll ask Philip about this, but the other author, Philip Clayton, is, I think, started out as a Quaker. Maybe he still is. And kind
That's
of
right.
moved right into this. So, and then I also read in that same chapter, Matthew Fox was talking about how you can find it in Hinduism and in Buddhism and different various religions. So it's not just something that you guys
certainly
came
That's
up.
right, and
mm-hmm.
Philip might mention a book he previously did with a scholar named Lorelei Bernanke called Panentheism Across the World's Traditions. And so, as you say, it appears, and a similar type of theological framework appears in different traditions, and it means different things, and it's expressed in different ways, but mm-hmm. that we are included within a more than human reality that is both immanent within us, including our environing sort of atmosphere, as it were. That vision is deeply rooted in spiritual and religious traditions.
Yes, absolutely. Now, okay, so let's backtrack just a little bit, Andrew. How did you two get together? How did this all come about, this vision of getting this collection together of an anthology of spiritual memoirs? How did that start?
Sure thing. So I think one of the unique interests that Philip and I share is we both want to hear and engage fresh and dynamic understandings of God. But we know that intimately linked to that often is personal, spiritual, and intellectual narratives. And so one of the convictions that both of us started to think about with respect to the book is that what one affirms about God cannot ultimately be divorced from how they've come to that affirmation. So, for example, if I were to ask you, what do you believe about God or the universe, you could tell me in rather impersonal bullet points if you wanted. But if I were to say, yes, but how have you come to that affirmation, that how question assumes a deeply personal narrative backdrop. It's the meandering of your own path mm-hmm. into these types of questions or experiences. And so we wanted to focus in on that how question in the sense that for many, the spiritual journey is interior, mm-hmm. but it's not meant to be shared alone. We actually can have a sort of mutual deepening of our spiritual journeys when we share them. So these themes were initially a part of our initial thoughts in putting the book together, in mm-hmm. the conviction that we gain much, in fact, from trailing the spiritual paths of others to see what they have discovered might help and deepen our own path.
Absolutely. And I agree with that. I do agree that when we can hear other people's personal journeys, it enhances or gives us some thought, some seed that can illuminate our own, and I learned a lot. Like, for instance, I was reading Deepak Chopra's chapter that he wrote, and I thought, oh my God, he had an uncle that used to go and visit a saint every month for fun. And this is something that he remembers all his life and has stayed with him and contributed to his own personal journey. Right? That's just one example of what you were saying. And I know for myself, when you say how, because it is a journey. It's not a destiny. It's a journey. And I think that, because I've never thought of God, even when I was a little girl, I never thought of God as some anthropomorphic guy in the sky. I never did. And so I never thought there was a man up there with a big white beard who's going, I'm keeping track of whether you're good or bad. I always thought it was a energy, a source. And often, and I think the how question is really interesting because, I was diagnosed with a very rare form of ovarian cancer last year. And, and I've just coming through, I just hit my 9-month mark. And my whole concept of God changed in 1 year. And I've grown. My journey accelerated by, 1,000 years or something, within a 1 year time frame. So to me, that's interesting to see how people form and frame and kind of, Philip talks about his journey. You kind of didn't, but you did write the introduction. So why did you not choose to write a chapter besides the introduction?
So I do have the introduction, and then I have a concluding chapter, which does attempt to, integrate some of the insights into sort of deeper reflection on a more panentheistic notion. But I don't so much there bring my own journey into the pages, but more try to bring together the insights of the book.
Right. You did a good job with that. You did a great job with that, I have to say. You did meld it together. I'm fascinated by how you guys picked this group of people, too. And then
absolutely. It's a dynamic group.
Yeah.
I wonder, Servet, if I can comment on your notion or the deepening of your journey, the challenging perhaps your journey given your diagnosis. It's interesting. In each of these chapters, we see different, we can call them dark nights of the soul, if you want.
Right.
Each of these chapters and each of these authors have a different type of dark night. And one in particular, it was Rabbi Bradley Artson.
Right.
Here is a journey that, again, he was struggling through for him personally, a cancer diagnosis, changing his understanding of God, certainly, but also the diagnosis of his son with autism. Right. So these are questions about essentially the problem of evil, his sort of anthropomorphic God, as it were, the one that you didn't believe in. Good for you.
Right.
Was deeply challenged. The God that controls fate, that can intervene, that can stop, say, cancer diagnoses from happening. That all changed for him. In others, it might not be a medical diagnosis. Maybe it's something intellectual fatigue. Somebody like John Cobb in the book or Keith Ward, both of them faced a type of atheist rejection where sort of a monumental amount of evidence against a certain notion of God was posed, and that notion died, and they were left in a sort of liminal space of wondering about whether or not there's a different notion of God. Of course, both of them would discover that. And another one might be just an uncertain life transition. So one of my favorite chapters is Sister Ilia Delio. She's the chair of theology at Villanova University. She was on a very lucrative path in the sciences, and all of a sudden has this undeniable lure or intuitive call, if you want, to become a shoeless Carmelite nun. This is no easy transition, but all of these sort of represents different type of dark night moments that I think are worthwhile to see because they can show us that the dark nights of the spiritual journey are not exterior to it. Often they're very much a part of it, and our changing notions of God are wedded often to our experiences of those dark nights.
Right. And you exactly. And I've had more than that. I mean, I was born in Pakistan and, I grew up in London. I grew up in Montreal and California. So I'm a British citizen, Canadian citizen, American citizen. I've been around a lot of different religions and a lot of different philosophies. And I purposely studied a lot of them just to find my own journey. And I wasn't finding it in religion. So what's the connection, do you think, between panentheism and religion?
Sure. So, and your point is a good one in that looking at different traditions,
right,
helps us to in different ways inaugurate our path in a different sort of sense. Now, a lot of people have, as we've seen, the nuns, the spiritual but not religious category, are those for whom institutional religion, at least in its popular forms, has really gone by the wayside. Nevertheless, there's many individuals who want to stay spiritually grounded. And so while panentheism is something that can be found in and among the textures of different traditions, we might say that it's not necessarily wedded to any just one of them. You have people for whom institutional religion is not an option, but nevertheless they remain grounded in a panentheistic-like vision. Or perhaps they commune with nature in such a way that nature is a sacrament. It's something under, in, and through which the reality of the divine is made known. So, and I think what's interesting in this book in particular is that while different traditions are represented, we have different arenas within the Judeo-Christian tradition. We have voices also from Hindu, Buddhist, and the Jewish tradition. But each of these authors, even though they're grounded in some of these traditions, they've had a multi-religious path. Rupert Sheldrake, for example, practiced Sufi meditation, Hindu spirituality. And actually this path for him was essential in his rediscovery of the Christian tradition. But the book is not simply about finding your way into a religion. It's about beginning to inhabit and orient yourself to the world in such a way so that the reality of God, to quote the title, can be found in everyone and everywhere. Exactly. And whether or not that's wedded to a religious tradition is an interesting question. But I think for a lot of these authors, they'd say it's not. It's actually wedded to inhabiting the world and existing as such.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And because I don't think, when people are hearing all of this, this is not a book that brought together a group of authors to try and get you all to be panentheists. It's an explanation of a philosophy, just like someone would be explaining Buddhism, which isn't a religion, So this same thing. This is not a set religious path of any kind. It's just a way of thinking or a way of a lifestyle. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Get that?
I think it has certainly. It not only is a philosophy, but sort of evokes a certain practical orientation to the world. And of course, it should be said that not all the authors use that term, or perhaps would be comfortable in using that type of language, but that the sort of resonance between them is more of a panentheistic type of resonance, as opposed to this sort of popular notion, that God is up there and out there and we are down here and therefore the religious orientation is about leaving here and going somewhere else. Right. Whereas for panentheistic type of spirituality, and these authors I think would agree on this, the ideal is much more about living more deeply into the world we inhabit. The spiritual orientation is towards the world as evocative of the infinite reality behind it.
Right. That's why quite a few of the authors that you chose, and we still need to get to that, talked about nature and the connection between their spiritual journey and nature, because God is in all of that, right?
That's right. And I think definitely, I'd say for a lot of them, certainly for Philip's chapter, for Rupert Sheldrake, Matthew Fox, nature becomes this medium through which God shines. Its vastness, its beauty, its suggestiveness as to a divine reality behind it. So, Cynthia Bourgeault, for example, recalls this radiant, amazing sunlit pumpkin patch in late October. So she describes it in a beautiful way, and she describes the sense that she got it in that moment, that everything suffusing the picture was in her and in everything. It was sort of this mystical type of experience mediated through nature. Right. Rupert Sheldrake, too, he finds himself in a cave in India with a Hindu sadhu. And meditating, he comes out and looks at the mountain over the trees, and he's in the grass, and he describes this blissful, conscious presence, something he says is far greater than his own.
Right.
And even Matthew Fox, he recalls when he was 12 years old, he visited Niagara Falls, and he sensed this power and presence there that he later would describe as mysticism. But I think certainly nature is one of the themes in this book that is central.
Well, it is. And in Philip's chapter, I mean, a no-name beach is where he went one day. And I was like, okay, I totally got that. I totally got that. And you know what happened for me? You know what happened for me was during a total eclipse of the sun. And I must have been like 16 or maybe not even. You know, I come from a very traditional Muslim home where at 15 they said, you know, you're either going to get married. And it was the 70s and I was living in California, and they said there's only two ways a Muslim girl leaves a Muslim father's house: married or in a coffin. So I ran away from home, and I never went back. But part of the story is that I, you know, was out on my own at a very young age. And I think it was shortly after I ran away, because I remember that it was connected to that. And I saw, for the first time in my life, I didn't look right into it because you're not supposed, a total eclipse of the sun. And I never had experienced anything like that before. And for me, that was like, oh my God, like literally God. Because there's got to be something doing here. Something's making those planets revolve around the sun without them all falling down, and you know, turning little embryos into people. And I'm like, you know, I think that's when it hit me. So those kinds of moments are what are brought up in all of these chapters. You know, that each person personally lived, and it changed them.
Right.
Right. So how did you pick them?
Yeah. So, well, one of the features that we looked for is, again, prominence in a certain way. So some authors, Deepak, for example, or Rupert Sheldrake, Matthew Fox, are more well-known than others, you know, collectively have reached and influenced millions. But we also wanted to include those who have made an impact even in the academy. So their orientations may be more philosophical rather than more practical and spiritual. Of course, there's a connection between the two. And we wanted to choose those who we knew had dynamic and interesting narratives. Sheldrake has spoken of his before, but what he reveals in his chapter in particular are some personal elements that have not been published before. And so we wanted to choose those who've made an impact, who were prominent, but also who we knew could write in a personal narrative form. So one of the questions that Phil and I addressed initially was whether or not, you know, this could be an academic text or not. We decided really quickly, given the narrative backdrop, that that's not the type of text we wanted to produce. In fact, Sheldrake and others asked whether or not this was going to be a type of polemical or academic text. We said it's not at all. We want to hear the how of your spiritual journey and what you've discovered.
Oh, I'm so glad.
A couple of things.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did it that way. I am. I'm so glad it's not an academic book, you know? Okay,
Sure.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. I think you.
No, and I just, on that point, there's been a lot of academic books put out, you know, on the God-world relationship and philosophical theology, and I love that. Certainly, but much of my PhD is surrounding that, and panentheism in particular as well. But to locate it within a personal narrative backdrop makes it relatable for people. And, you know, often people don't wake up one day and say, I'm a panentheist. You know, they're not necessarily argued to that direction, but they wake up having experienced the world in such a way that traditional designations such as theism or atheism or pantheism sort of lose significance. They're looking for something that's more participatory, inclusive, and immanent. And whether one likes the term panentheism or not, you know, that's sort of up for debate. That's fine. Cynthia Bourgeault, for example, doesn't like the term and prefers something else. But the image that she evokes is something interbaiting is the term she used. It's participatory, it's dynamic, and it's including all of us. Right.
Were there any authors besides me that couldn't do it? Or that, you know, I'm kidding. I was working on my third book at the time, so I could. No, were there any authors that you wanted but were unable to for some reason, or are you pretty happy with the crowd that you got?
I think we're really happy and we're surprised with the group we got. So, we sent out a number of invitations, formal letters to describe the vision and themes of the book, and then invite them. And certainly some, the schedules of some were so busy that they decided not to. But in fact, the way we went about getting these different authors was strategic and rather interesting. A number of the contributors are friends with one another.
Oh.
So, for example, Rupert Sheldrake is a good friend with Deepak Chopra. He's also a good friend with Matthew Fox. And so we have certain type of friend groups that appear within this book as well, and they even cite each other at times. So, but I think we were surprised with the type of group we ended up with, and it's an interesting mixture between a more New Age popular spirituality and a more philosophical and theological academic community as well. But I think the balance is nice given the narrative backdrops of the book.
Yeah, I agree. I just wondered if there was one person that you wished that could have been there, or that you might do another book to have a different group, right?
Sure. Well, we weren't able to get a hold of, say, Ken Wilber, who's done much in terms of an integral spirituality.
Right.
But this book is, as you said, really conducive to another volume. And the basic insight would be this, is that there's no end to the amount of fascinating narratives one can combine into these type of volumes. And the value you can derive from that, I think, is worthwhile, because it's fundamentally about sharing personal narratives and based on the conviction that we can deepen ourselves by seeing where others have been, by seeing what they've discovered about God or the spiritual life. Exactly.
That's why I thought that might happen. I just foresee that a second book. We're running out of time, so I have to say we've been talking to Andrew Davis, who is co-author of How I Found God in Everyone and Everywhere. It's an anthology of spiritual memoirs, and the group they got is unbelievable. Like we've been talking about Deepak and Matthew Fox and Rupert Sheldrake, and the other author is Philip Clayton, who's going to call in about 2 minutes. So how do people get a hold of you? Should they get a hold of you? Should they get a hold of him? I know you can get your book on Amazon, but do you have a website?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
I do. So I would love for your listeners to call in, or excuse me, to email me or reach me through my website in particular would be the best place, and that's andrewmdavis.info. And we've already been receiving interesting questions and people loving the book, people being challenged by it. Just yesterday, in fact, I received a message through my website from a woman in Australia who said that this book came to her in a time in her life when she had nowhere else to turn. That was really gratifying for me to hear that.
Oh,
so I'd say andrewmdavis.info is the best way to contact me.
Okay.
And to see more of my work.
Okay, good. And are you going to start working on a second book, or should I ask Philip that, or we can go from there, I think, right?
I'd say we're considering that strongly, and based on the reaction we've seen so far, this is something I'd like to continue working on myself. Yes.
Oh, good. It's fascinating, and I loved it. And I like that he did a chapter, but you sort of kind of open the book and close the book and sort of tie everything together. It's kind of like you're the bookends.
Exactly. That's how we thought of it.
Well, that's how I thought. I saw like you're the two bookends, and then there's all this incredible information in the center. So I just think it's unbelievable. It's 6:30. I know Philip Clayton's going to call in any minute, and then we're going to say good night. And I think this worked out better, because it's hard to have two guests. It's not if you're live in person. If you're live in person, that's not such a bad thing. But when you're on the phone, it's always hard to tell who's when can I talk? It's hard to get everyone together. So I think this worked out much better. So as soon as he calls in, we're going to say good night to you and go from there. But I love the book. I do. I thought it was fascinating. I looked at and I thought it was an interesting title, and then I heard, it's about panentheism, and I'm like, what the heck? What is that? I'm like,
what is that language?
I know, and it's scary, and it shouldn't be,
Sure.
Now it's not.
And, one interesting way to think about it too, just before Phil calls in,
Mm-hmm.
is that some people have looked at the negative meaning of the book. So to say that I have found God in everyone and everywhere means that God is not found in just some people and some places.
Oh.
And that often is how different religious, conservative religious, facets of our traditions have thought, is that God is in one place or associated with one group or one person.
He's on the phone, so we're going to take his call. We're going to take his call now.
Great.
So, now he hung up because I didn't take it fast enough. So I'm going to let him call back, hopefully. I hesitated because I was listening to you, Andrew.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't quite click that button fast enough. So hopefully he will just call right back in, and we'll say goodnight. But I can even say goodnight to you. So here he is. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Take care. It's a great book.
Servet.
Bye.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Hi there, Philip. Philip Clayton.
Hi there.
Hi. Oh, so we've had a very fascinating conversation. I hope you've been listening in.
I heard every word.
Okay, great. Okay, so now we have the second author, Philip Clayton, on the line for everybody out there that's listening, who is a philosopher of religion and science whose work focuses on the intersection of science, ethics, and society. And you have an Ingraham chair. You hold an Ingraham chair at Claremont School of Theology, which is how I believe you met Andrew, right? And
that's right.
And you've also written some fascinating other books, too. One of them that I love, the title, The Predicament of Belief, Science, Philosophy, and Faith, and In Quest of Freedom, The Emergence of Spirit in the Natural World. I love that. So I think this is awesome that the two of you connected and got together to do this anthology. It's fascinating to me, and like I was telling Andrew, I think it's really awesome. Now he tied it together in the beginning. In the end, you actually wrote a chapter for it, which I thought was really fascinating. Did you hear the part where I said, "Oh yeah, he was at No Name Beach. I got to find out where that was." But you knew from a very young age, very young, because that was part of. Well, not real young, because you tried Christianity and then you sort of moved into Quakerism, and then but at a pretty young age, you were out in nature and you just would look around and say, "That's part of God. That's God."
That's right. That's right.
And then you were drawn to the Quaker religion because their philosophy, basic philosophy is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that of God is everyone. That of God in everyone.
I think most people don't realize what it means to be able to say that we're linked with the divine, that we have access to a reality beyond the trees and the sky and the ocean around us, that they're conduits, they're vehicles, they're vessels, they're pathways towards something far more profound.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, I think that's what happened when I really got God. Was when I got diagnosed with ovarian cancer last year in a very rare form. But I really realized all of a sudden, I'm part of that power. That,
that's right.
and it was just, it changed my whole life. And I've heard other cancer patients. I read something that Dr. Joe Dispenza wrote, and he said that some people that came back from terminal illnesses realized that they were riding on the back of a dragon that was all powerful and all knowing, and then that's how they cured themselves or got well. And I thought to myself, you know what? Yeah, it's a much bigger thing than I think you can even put words to. And go ahead.
It's so powerful that it makes you wonder why people seem so satisfied with the everyday appearances. They look in the mirror and they see something that's merely a human face and merely part of getting up and going to work. And I think if people had any sense of what we mean when we say we're linked to something deeper, we use the word divine, but that doesn't mean we understand what that is. Mm-hmm. If we could just see that all of these things are a form of connection to something far greater than ourselves, it absolutely changes how you live in the world.
No, absolutely, because really then you find out who you truly are, I believe.
Yeah.
That our authentic self is not, I'm a woman, I was born in Pakistan, they were burying baby girls at that time, so they named me Treasure. I'm not really a treasure. I'm really no more or less a treasure than anyone else. I am not someone who lives in I'm not those labels. I think of myself as a little piece of that divine.
What's so clear in your book, Servet, is that you are able to see that what it means to be a conduit of something more, and to lift people's eyes above, say, this romantic relationship or this disappointment or this sickness.
Right.
And to have people recognize really there's another dimension if we'll only allow ourselves to be aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. So you knew okay, so where's No Name Beach? I got to know.
Well, I have to tell, for your listeners, I have to tell the story. I grew up in an atheist family. There was no religion.
Right.
But this is Northern California, and when you walk through those hills, through the redwood groves, there were redwoods in our front yard, then you just sense something sacred. So with no talk of God, I found a connection to that breathing, throbbing nature around me. I knew nothing of Quakerism, but we went to a little summer school when I was 12, and under this huge oak tree, we would play games and do crafts and listen to stories. And that was, without the notion of God, that was, how do you call it? It was the sacred. And then we'd get in this old VW bus, all the kids, maybe it was 2 VW buses, and we'd drive out to the coast near Bodega Bay and up Highway 1, these beautiful bluffs. And there was one place where the highway came down to the ocean. And that was the place we'd always park. And since I was a child and now through, my children, it's always No Name Beach. You walk out onto the sand, the kids play in the rocks and play in the water, and then the parents invite us back. We make stone soup. I don't know if you know that tradition together. And after the soup, just as the sun's setting, we walk out, we'd sing, "The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind." And as the sun strikes the Pacific Ocean and begins to sink in, the smell of salt, the little bits of fog wetting your face, and then we'd sing those words, "Day is done, gone the sun, from the lakes, from the trees, from the sky. All is well, safely rest, God is nigh." And all I needed was that. Whatever this thing around me was, the blazing sun, the powerful ocean, call it God. It is that which is inside of us. It's the very atoms of our bodies.
Wow.
That, I think, is where we came from.
Yes.
In the book.
I'm so glad I asked that question because that was so beautiful. And it was beautifully written in the book as well. I remember that. And I just thought, I have to ask about that because it was really beautiful.
Let me give credit to an incredible mystic author who's in the book, and Cynthia Bourgeault speaks all over the country. She's an incredibly powerful mystical speaker, and she wrote a chapter that blew me out of the water about the presence of the divine in every moment, the sunlight coming into the house, the flowers outside, the smells. And I was inspired by that chapter, which wasn't about theology or metaphysics, but about here, now, this moment.
Right.
And I thought, that gives me the freedom. Cynthia invites me to try to tell a story without technical language and just that sense of, okay, call it the divine, that permeates all things.
Right. You know where that happened for me in your book? It happened for me in the book. Well, your chapters, all of them are good. But that kind of moment happened for me when I read about the butterfly.
Yes. Tell them, do you remember?
Go ahead and tell us, because it was beautiful. That did the same thing for me. That brought tears to my eyes. And I went, oh, yeah, I get it, because, I went through what I went through last year, so now it's easy for me to see. But tell a little bit about that. It was just...
Actually, if you'll allow me, I want to tell the form in which it transformed my life. And this is Rachel Carson, the
Even
great, the early woman, 1962, whose book Silent Spring brought to the country's attention that DDT was killing our gardens and our animals. One of the first times that the environmental movement began to push back against industry and pollution and the death of DDT. She, an incredible nature author, she describes in unbelievable detail the fish and the land animals and the birds over the coast of New England. And then one of the women who really changed the course of history. And at the end of her life, she died young. She was near the coast of Maine and with a friend. In fact, I was walking along the coast of Maine by Portland, and I saw a plaque in a big rock. It had an expression on it that came from her last letter, and it was the spot where her ashes had been thrown into that bay, which she had written about for decades and decades, like no other author ever. And Rachel said, "And most of all, I shall miss the monarchs." And I realized that an entire life dedicated to nature and that something inside it that's so beautiful, she would find that image of the fluttering monarch butterfly along the coast of Maine as the image that showed, well, listen, think about it. If the divine can be a tiny fluttering butterfly bounced by the wind or resting on a flower with its wings moving up and down, you guys know what the monarch looks like. If that can be the divine in its gentleness and its momentary appearance, then we recognize that truly our world is infused with a power and a beauty beyond what we can imagine.
Oh, that's beautiful. It really was beautiful. I really think that, this is a really amazing book. And I'm glad you guys got together to do this. And Andrew kind of touched on how that happened. I hope that you guys continue to do this, another one. I really do. Do you ever think, Servet, that we're part of a sort of a time of spiritual renewal, a time of a new paradigm emerging around us? Yes.
I don't know if I sense it in your. I've been watching your YouTube videos and looking at your books, and I sense that you also have that awareness of something breaking in that wasn't so accessible somehow in in the modern period, let's say.
No.
Is that a part of your?
Absolutely.
belief?
Absolutely. And I think what happened to me for a reason. I think everything happens for a reason. I think that we are part of that divine plan too, because if you really do understand, when you get it, when it hits you that way, it's hard, you can't even put it in words actually, but when it does, it changes you on a deeper level. And I think that happened so that I can, help other people, like facilitate this new thing that's happening that you just talked about. Mm-hmm. And that's what you guys are doing. So what I love about your work is it's got a concreteness to it. Mm-hmm. You want people in your own work with individual clients and then in your publications, your blog and your YouTubes, those are encouraging people to find that power, and I'll just call it the divine, but I'm not going to worry about the word at all. No. To find that power that they have to reorient their lives, and they don't believe they have it. No, that's right. And that's exactly where I go. And divine, the source, the universe, God, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's just there, and it's part of us, and we're a part of it. And that's what this whole book is how I found God in everyone and everywhere. And that it does change you, because your whole world changes. I never look at anybody and can be that mad at them, because God's in everyone. God is, it changes your whole perspective. It changes your whole life. When I got that, go ahead. Tell it. No, when I got that, when I understood that, I thought, this is what it's all about. We need to tell people this. And I need to get people to open up to that, because then you can just be you. Just be who you really are. And that makes everything happen. You don't need more books and more seminars and more, you just need to find you. And however that journey, and that's why I liked that you just went ahead and talked about, you let people tell their journey which helps other people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
People don't feel that they have a permission to write their own spiritual memoir. But each of us has had a set of spiritual experiences, even if we can't name it, that need our attention. I actually believe in writing them down, even if I never share it with anybody. Part of what the New Age paradigm is, I think, is moving from a period where, like, call it the medieval, theologian, where somebody knows who God is, and then they deduce, here's what the angels are, and here's what the meaning of this and this and this is, until you get told what's your place in the hierarchy. And then you kind of salute and you say, okay. But think about the title, How I Found God in Everyone and Everywhere. I think, and this is also a Quaker tradition, look around at everyone. Look around at everywhere. Look at the person next to you on the bus and the ways her eyes shine. Look at the wrinkles of sadness on that old man's face. And recognize every moment around you. The wind right now outside my window that's blowing the branches of the trees. The person I saw, the last person as I came to your radio interview, who was a younger student from Korea with a smile and a look of confidence of a young man. That, I understand, that I'm drawn to. So great. I don't care. Call it God, call it the source, call it the universe. It draws us up from what's around us. It shows us a power, and it shows a power that permeates the world around us. That's, for me, the revolutionary switch. God downward or God upward.
Exactly. And you talk about that in the chapter that you wrote with Jane Goodall, and how that she kind of told you the story of how that spark of that spiritual power is in all of us. And I loved that.
Oh, can I tell Jane's story?
You can tell it really quick.
If I've ever met, so I'm not Catholic and I don't, I'm not much about saints, but if I don't know what it means, but if I'd ever met a saint, it's Jane Goodall. She, at the time I was working with her, 1997 through 2003, she was traveling over 300 days a year. She'd just been named peace ambassador from the United Nations. She was launching Roots and Shoots. Stories I could tell about being in a jungle in India with her just sitting on the ground and taking in the moment of the life that was around us. But the story that helps me understand spirituality more than anything else is Jane's story about the young male chimpanzees. She lived in Gombe Nature Preserve in Tanzania, and she was the first one ever to name the chimpanzees, to build relationships with them, and to be able to follow without disturbing them. That was her gift. So there was a group of younger males, so they weren't a part of the group. They were sort of sent off to this side, marginalized for a certain period in their growth. And they were walking along the big river where all the chimps lived, and they found a smaller creek heading up that they'd never been to before. And so they started, the five of them, climbing over the rocks and moving up, and then there was a big corner in this creek, in this, kind of a valley or gully. And of course, Jane is following along behind with her little blonde hair and her little smile. And she's following them. They go around the corner, and suddenly they see for the first time a waterfall. And the water's coming off the cliff up there about 40 feet high, and it's dropping down into this pool, and the foam is splashing up. They come around, and they freeze because the spray is hitting them in the face. The sound is overwhelming, the smell of the water in their noses, and they just freeze. And then Jane Goodall says, after that, they lift up their arms above their heads, just like a human might do, and they start doing this sort of dance of joy, jumping up and down on the shore of the little pool, raising their hands, spinning around, and making their sound that chimps make when there's joy. Now tell me that's not God.
That's God. See, that's what I mean. When you see a total eclipse of the sun and you go, oh my God, I meant it. And that's true. Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful story. And I remembered that. I did remember that. There's some things. There's things in this book that you've written that when you read them, you won't forget. They will change your life. And it may not I don't know which chapter might speak to you or which author.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
It's just that
Right.
I think with this anthology, one of them definitely will. And that was the point, and that's what I loved about it. So, and we're...
So that where I think you're going is that there isn't just one spiritual path today.
Right.
Study the mystics through the centuries, and you find radically different approaches. So I'm a student of the Hindu traditions, and two of the most famous, Ramanuja and Shankara, actually have very different paths in understanding Brahman, the ground of all things.
Right.
The Western mystics, the Christian mystics, are vastly different. The Jewish tradition of Kabbalah is a form of mysticism unlike anything else. I'd love to talk about the Jewish
Sufism and Kabbalism and all of the Upanishads. We could go on and on. I mean, but there's
different paths, right?
Right.
So nowadays, what are we going to do? We're going to say that one path is normative, and I want to say a book, a teaching has to be a collection of spiritual memoirs. Mm-hmm. It has to be a collection of pathways, and each person invites you into the path. And if it's Richard Rohr, who's huge influence from his Center of Action and Contemplation, or if it's Cynthia Bourgeault, who's a very down-to-earth person who finds spirituality in the sparkling of the water in the pond outside her house.
Wow.
Each one invites us in to our own particular journey.
Right. And then that journey is what makes, because the whole point of the journey is to make ourselves whole too, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what does that is when we realize we're not missing anything. We're already perfect. We just need to connect to that.
Do you think we're in an age of more brokenness than because of technology and so forth than in previous generations?
Yes. And that's
how do you understand that?
I wish I could get into it, but we're running out of time and we're live and there's another show after. But I'm totally with you on that. That's why I want you to continue doing this work, because there is a disconnection here now. And, with all this technology and all this information flying at people right and left, that we forget that we are just perfect, beautiful people already. And that is always been my message. Be you to the full is how I always end my show, because that's what's really beautiful. Because then you, if you are spirit, a part of that connection of the divine, whatever you want to call it, then there's no need to strive and be depressed and but then social media comes in, all these other things, and I think that we need to really connect with that. And you can still have another religion if you want. You can still be Catholic or a nun or a Quaker or Buddhist or Hindu or Christian, whatever. But you still have to find that connection. And if that religion isn't doing it, then find it however you can. Find it through other people's experiences and journeys. That's what I think. Yeah. I do. I mean, do you agree?
It's almost like a spiritualized religion, isn't it? Mm-hmm. There was religion as a kind of series of required rituals and words, liturgies, and then there's a religion softened and warmed and made more gentle and approachable by that sort of warmth of spiritual connection between us.
Right. What a lovely way to end this. That was beautifully said, Philip Clayton. I love you. That was awesome. And I could have done a whole show with you and a whole show with Andrew, because I'm already going to fire myself because I forgot to open the lines for callers to call in. And that didn't happen because I got so caught up in what we were saying that I didn't get to that. So, anyway, how can people find you? They want to connect with you. I know the book is How I Found God in Everyone and Everywhere. It's an anthology of spiritual memoirs. It's written by the first gentleman I talked to, Andrew M. Davis, and you, Philip Clayton, together. I know it's on Amazon. Is there a way for them to connect with you as well?
Mm-hmm. I'm at philipclayton.net.
Okay.
And I also invite people to consider coming to the World Parliament of Religions, that meeting once every 4 years where 10,000 spiritual leaders and practitioners from around the world come. We've been working for a couple of years to help prepare that global meeting of religions with that. Because spirituality emerges out of religious people who see what they share in common.
What's the name of that again? And how do people...
World Parliament of Religions, or Parliament of the World's Religions. And if you Google that, you can find, amazingly, in North America, it's been, in South Africa and Barcelona and Melbourne, and now here it is. And some of your listeners may be close enough to go even for a day. Amazing. Dalai Lama has closed it in the past. One of the Pope's representatives on the environment will be there. Name a spiritual leader and tradition, and you'll find it.
Is it here in the United States this year? Is that what you're saying? Is it here?
In Toronto. So you're a Canadian citizen, so who lived in Montreal, so you'll understand that it's amazing to be able to have the entire downtown of Toronto, the convention center, packed with people with saffron robes and purple robes.
I love it. I'm going to go. I'm going to go.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm going to go. When is it? Do you know?
It's November 1 to 7.
Okay.
So it's just about a month away, and an amazing spiritual collection. It's a living group of spiritual memoirs.
Wonderful. Awesome. I'm so sorry I didn't open the lines. Forgive me for that. And all you people listening all over the country here, and we're in 79 other countries all over the world. Pardon me for that, but this was worth it for me because we got into some really good discussion, and I think it was well worth it. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, and keep going.
Thanks, Servet.
Keep doing your work.
You too.
Keep doing your work.
And thank you for your show, Servet.
Thank you
so much.
Good night. Take care.
Good night.
Wow. Bye. Wow, what a great show. Two awesome people who've written a really awesome book. And I can see now how I found God in everyone and everywhere, and I love them both. Andrew M. Davis and Philip Clayton are the authors. They are amazing people. They're both philosophers and theologians that have many degrees. Between the two of them, more than I will ever see in one lifetime, that's for sure. Maybe more than I'll ever see in 3 or 4 lifetimes. But it was awesome, and I really have to go because we're running out of time. But you know where you can find me, ServetHassan.com, ServetHassan.com. I keep saying new stuff's coming in. It is. I have a fan page and a new website that's up next week. So we'll go from there because I did literally go too long, and I had such a good time. What a great show. Thank you so much for joining me. Be you to the full. That's what's really beautiful, and have a great show next week. So join me again live on Intuitive Inc. Thank you, and good night.